This episode is brought to you by White Claw Surge. Great podcast pick, friend. No surprises there. After all, you're all about finding the tastiest flavors out there, just like White Claw Surge. And with big, bold flavors to enjoy, like blood orange, blackberry, cranberry, and more, it's time to go all in on taste. Unleash the flavor. Unleash White Claw Surge. Please drink responsibly. Hard seltzer with flavors. 8% alcohol by volume. White Claw Seltzer Works, Chicago, Illinois.
Hello, and welcome to It's a Fandom Thing. I'm your host, Erin Marlowe, and each week I'm joined by a panel of guests to discuss all things fandom and pop culture, primarily from a female perspective. You'll find everything from fanfic, to cosplay, to Schitt's Creek, to Supernatural, and everything in between. So put on your favorite piece of fandom merch, set aside that fanfic that you're writing about your OTP, and sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Hello, and welcome to It's a Fandom Thing. I'm your host, Erin Marlowe, and on this episode, we are kicking off Music Month. And this month, it's all grunge. You voted, and this won overwhelmingly. I will say up front, and, all my panelists will know this too, I was never really a fan of grunge, and I grew up in the era when grunge was first coming around. This is like my childhood. So it's been really interesting visiting this music as an adult, and I'm gaining a deeper appreciation for it. I will say what we're kicking off with, Nirvana, is, of the four we're talking about, the one I like the most. So that's a good thing. But I did want to get that out up front. I won't be putting down any of these bands, but sometimes I might not have as much to say. So let me introduce my panelists. And unfortunately, Carla was supposed to be here, but Carla got food poisoning, which is just such a bummer. She is so bummed, but she is recording a little tiny bit of something because she really, really wanted to talk about Nirvana, the music, and also how she thinks, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, Carla, but thinks that Nirvana is better than the Beatles, and Nirvana, if you strip away some of the music, is actually a lot like the Beatles, but better than them. She's just not a fan of the Beatles. So, but I just thought that was interesting because I don't know if either of my panelists will agree with that, but that was one of the things that she was hoping to talk about.
Can I throw in a corny joke, please?
Yes, of course you can.
Did Carla get food poisoning from eating Mexican seafood? I don't need to know the actual answer. I just wanted to make that Nirvana pun joke.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. You are always here for the great pun jokes. But let me introduce my panelists. So first up, she's back. We last heard her on our LGBTQIA plus essential playlist. Ashleigh from Wizard. Hello, Ashleigh.
Hey, all. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me back. I came prepared for this Nirvana discussion. I got my Seattle Mariners merch all prepped up. That's my connection to the city. And yeah, it's going to be great, I think. Nirvana is one where there's quite a telling question, I think, that comes later on. I won't spoil anything from the prep I did for this, where the answer to it is, I don't know, because I wasn't born yet. So this is one where, a lot of what I've got from Nirvana is both hearing it as, a band that existed already in pop culture by the time I came about, and then influenced things down the line. So I've really got the tsunami aftershock of Nirvana's whole legacy to contend with.
And then also, you heard him making a joke earlier from Soundtrack Your Life, Ryan. Hello, Ryan.
Hello. I've also brought some Nirvana-related stuff. This is the vinyl record of the No Alternative compilation, which came out in the 90s. Uh-huh. Famously, Nirvana is the bonus track on it. It's unlisted. And so when they re-released it on vinyl, the first thing I did was, on my vinyl record player, can I find the bonus track? Because I'm going to be very angry if the bonus track is not here.
And you found it.
And I found
I'm
it.
assuming.
Yeah, I would have just chucked it out the window. I mean, I love...
chucked it out the window.
I mean, there are a lot of great bands on this soundtrack, or on this compilation, but I think the Nirvana song that's on here is very special to me, and we'll talk about that later.
Because I was going to ask you, but since we'll talk about it later, I won't ask you now. I am going to give a little bit of a brief background on Nirvana, just very brief. And I am going to give trigger warnings, of course. So Nirvana was an American rock band formed in Aberdeen, Washington in 1987. Founded by lead singer and guitarist Kurt Cobain and bassist Chris Novoselic. And I should have looked up the pronunciation of that. So if either of my panelists want to correct me, feel free to jump in.
Novoselic?
Thank you. The band went through a succession of drummers, most notably Chad Channing, before recruiting Dave Grohl in 1990. Nirvana's success popularized alternative rock, and they were often referenced as the figurehead band of Gen X. Their music maintains a popular following and continues to influence rock culture. And they're part of the big four of grunge music, and we're covering the big four this month. So, of course, the other four are Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam. So, which is how we're rounding out is with Pearl Jam. Nirvana is one of the best-selling bands of all time, having sold more than 75 million records worldwide. During its 3 years as a mainstream act, Nirvana received an American Music Award, Brit Award, and Grammy Award, as well as 7 MTV Video Music Awards and 2 NME Awards. The band achieved 5 #1 hits on the Billboard Alternative Songs chart and 4 #1 albums on the Billboard 200. In 2010, Rolling Stone ranked Nirvana number 30 in its list of the 100 greatest artists of all time. And their members were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in their first year of eligibility in 2014. And in 2023, they were honored with the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. And of course, and we'll be talking about it more later, Kurt Cobain sadly died in 1994 on April 8th, 1994. So we will be discussing that. And so trigger warnings, suicide, biggest trigger warning, drug abuse. He was a drug addict. So I don't know how much of that will come up, but definitely suicide is the biggest trigger warning for sure. So, Ashleigh, what I first want to know is, and I'm really, really interested in this too, just because it would have been a different time period for you, I'm sure, but what song or album was it that turned you into a Nirvana fan?
Well, ultimately, this may be the most basic answer, but perhaps this is reflective of the way that it permeated pop culture, never mind and specifically Smells Like Teen Spirit. Because that was, for people who weren't really digging into the deep cuts, that was what kind of left the legacy. And I came to that from learning to play the guitar and the drums in middle school, being into things that were big at that time, like Green Day was the big one I was into. And then talking to people like, my music teachers and then also my friends and being like, well, what's like this? And they were like, well, this is kind of like this. Of course, derived from it, rather, that sort of very loud, kind of West Coast American sound. Obviously, grunge and punk related genres, not the same thing, but definitely descendant in a way, and then following the tree back up to Nirvana. And then it wasn't really until I got older that I was like, okay, maybe we should start branching off into looking at some of the, what I would have considered deep cuts. Of course, at the time, if you were listening to them, would have been, much more in the mode. And so then finding it that way. But it was literally the most popular stuff was what got me into it, because that was what was front facing, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's kind of the case with a lot of bands, is that's how you're introduced, just because it's the most popular one. So if you're not very familiar with it, or if you're not if some friend doesn't go, hey, you got to listen to this song, and it's not like a popular one, I think that's what happens a lot of times, especially when you're not in the same generation that band was out in. So, yeah. And Ryan?
So I believe it was All Apologies from Unplugged in New York. So in 93 is, I believe, when the Unplugged special came out, and I had just gotten cable. So I was aware of Nirvana's music from the radio, Smells Like Teen Spirit, all the singles from Nevermind. But they played the performance of All Apologies from the Unplugged album a lot. So between that and I think the Heart-Shaped Box video, that was kind of my introduction to really paying attention to Nirvana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it can be overstated enough what that album how successful that MTV Unplugged album was and those performances. And that was like, I think that was maybe the biggest thing in that series ever was Nirvana, or at least one of the biggest bands that was part of the MTV Unplugged stuff. Because I think still to this day, when people think of Nirvana, I mean, other than Smells Like Teen Spirit is kind of just the automatic one I think people think of. And of course, they think of course, the album covers and stuff, and Kurt Cobain, but I think they go to the MTV Unplugged for sure, because it had a huge impact. And I think it probably introduced people to them. And I think also the benefit of that, or seeing any band live, is seeing sort of like how they are outside of that studio element, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think especially since people really like worshipped this band when I was growing up. So for me, this is really going to be dating myself. I was like, late junior high, junior high-ish when they came out, when they first started appearing. And I had friends that were really into them. Like I said, I never really got as into grunge, but everybody around me was. And it was like, for Gen X, we are still considered like a forgotten generation. It's like people talk about the boomers and then the millennials, and we're kind of in between that and not talked about as much, I don't think. And we were very angry, and we were raised, a lot of us, by parents who were supposed to change the world, and then ended up kind of, not all of them, but some of them, abandoning those ideals. And so this music came along and it spoke a lot to that, I think, in general. And I think Nirvana, especially, that anger and that disappointment, especially when it came to capitalism, and also the like glam rock that was right before this, which, a lot of people say this is what kind of killed that, was the grunge movement. I remember I was watching something, there's this documentary, I can't remember the name of it, and they're talking about hair metal and glam rock and everything. And one of the bands on there said, I will never forget, I was at a concert, I was playing, and someone came in and said, have you heard this band, Nirvana? Listen to them. And he said, I listened to them and I went, that's it, we're done. We're so done. This is going to take over. And then I guess literally it was like almost the next day, they had their ticket sales like just plummeted. It's really amazing how fast and how impactful it was. So it was everywhere. This was kind of like, for the people I hung out with, which were all the quote unquote weirdos and freaks and everything like that, and punks and goths and everything. It was like, even though not so much goths with this, but it was still like speaking to the people that felt lost and alone. And depressed, too. I think that was the other thing, too. So this is the question everybody hates me for. I understand. I know it's hard, but I'm making you do it. So, Ashleigh, what are 3 of your favorite Nirvana songs?
Would you like me to do bottom up or top down?
However you want to do it is fine.
Okay. Because I picked a very obvious one as my number 1, and I almost didn't want to pick it because of that. But I thought, well, you better to be honest about it and just say that it's my favorite one. So I'll start from the bottom up and give a number 3 that came from my broader exploring of it. Yeah, my number 3 pick is Breed. When I've been listening through Nirvana, I've really found that, I'm a big punk fan in general, so I really dig the stuff that's a bit faster, a bit louder, a bit more energetic than the stuff that's stripped down and laid back. There's a lot of benefit to that stuff. It's good in its own way, but I was gelling a lot more with the stuff that was less melancholy and a bit more, I don't know, had a little bit more energy to it, in my opinion. And so for me, Breed is a song that's got a lot of that. It's, notionally it's a love song, but it's got a lot of power to it, a lot of punch behind it. And so for number 2, I went sort of down a similar vein, and Aneurysm is my number 2 pick. And that's one where I think Breed and Aneurysm were both tracks that got a lot more live play, because neither of them were like on album. I think it was Breed that got like added back to an album later or something, but was never actually released as a single. So both of them kind of fell a little bit under the radar compared to most of the other like bit more mainstream songs. But those ones, I think, they gel with my music taste a lot better. And then for number one, I picked Smells Like Teen Spirit because it was the one that got me into the band. It's the one where it's kind of iconic in a way you mentioned the Beatles and that comparison to the Beatles. A lot of bands have been compared to them in that way. I think to have songs that are like that, where you just hear the opening notes and everybody knows the words. It doesn't matter if you don't. If the words don't even mean anything as they kind of descend into nothingness towards the back half of that song, which is the point. It doesn't matter because everybody's still going along with it because it's just that iconic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree with that. So Ryan, and it's fine if you have repeats.
Yeah, I'll go bottom to top just to kind of keep things consistent. So my number 3 is Aneurysm, so I have that in common. It's a great song, and I think I saw a live performance on MTV of it, and it just made me a bigger fan of the song. You Dave Grohl's harmonizing with Kurt on the chorus, it was very, very crisp, and it just sounded great, and there's great energy to that song. My number 2 is Drain You, which is off the Nevermind album. And I think once again, I saw them perform it on some MTV show, and it just kind of took it to another level as far as my enjoyment of that song. And I guess a common thing with all my picks is they're very melodic Nirvana songs. And I think we'll probably talk about it later, the Kurt Cobain's gift for melody that I think sometimes people kind of overlook. Obviously, he had a very powerful voice, and, they were, as a 3-piece, able to make a very, very big noise with just 3 people. But, I think he had a great gift for melody. And my number 1 song, it's funny because I think I talked about it earlier, that there's this compilation, and it's the bonus track. And for many years, people argued over what the name of the song was. So some people thought it was called Verse, Chorus, Verse. Some people thought it was called Sappy. Some people called it Laundry Room. It has 5 different names, but I believe the official name for it is Sappy.
I love that. Would you, though, I'm curious, Ryan, because I know it's the official name, would you stick with that, or would you call it something else?
Sappy makes the most sense. Well, I guess Laundry Room also makes sense, but for the longest time I thought it was called Verse, Chorus, Verse, and there's weird lore about the song, but it's my favorite even. And I'm not trying to be super cool because it's a deep cut or anything. It's just a really good song.
I just love that. I actually didn't know that part about all the lore about it, so I love that. And that's so cool that you have that on vinyl. I think I'm glad that seems to be making a resurgence, and people seem to be rediscovering it. So I love that. Well, I did select 3, okay, so because I've been listening to Nirvana nonstop lately. And mine are probably not going to be out there selections at all. But I'm going to go first with About a Girl, which I know is actually the song that I believe got Carla into Nirvana. Most of these ones that I've chosen are kind of more somber or sound somber. I like really depressing dark music, so that could be why these appeal to me. And it could be why, frankly, and I'm not saying other grunge bands aren't depressing or, somber, but it could be why out of the 4 we're covering, I like Nirvana the most, because to me, there's a lot more anguish to some of the lyrics and some of the music, and to Kurt's voice, for sure. I think his voice, there is a lot of pain and rawness there, so I think it comes across in a lot of his songs. And then I selected Plateau, again, going off the same thing of that feeling of that. But I think with this one also, it has a little bit of almost a jazzy beat to it, like a jazz sound to it. And I like that as well. So it's got a little bit more of an upbeat, but it's still kind of on that softer, more melodic thing. And this is definitely my favorite, no matter what, is Something in the Way. And I really think for me, it's sometimes there are songs that I'll listen to, and as a writer and as someone who's written screenplays before, I'll listen to them and I picture a trailer for a movie or a show or something like that. And every time I listen to this song, it's like very inspirational for that. And so that's a big reason I chose it. And I like the lyrics, even though sometimes, of course, with their lyrics, sometimes it's like poetry in the fact that, well, music's all poetry, but in the fact that you're not sure exactly what some of these lyrics are supposed to mean. And you kind of have to look deeper. Or I think people can kind of garner whatever their meaning would be for that song. So, but of the ones I've listened to while preparing for this, every time that one comes on, I hit rewind and play it again and again and again. So that is definitely my absolute favorite. So, and I prefer the versions of these songs that are on the Unplugged album too. Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Kurt Cobain and his death. And I know some of us weren't around during that time, but for those of us who were, but even after, just the impact of that and how that felt when you learned that. So we'll be right back.
Abercrombie denim is everything right now. Denim should feel like this. Confident, easy, like your butt has never looked better. If you didn't know, Abercrombie's Curve Love denim went viral in 2019 for eliminating waist gap, and it's still a game changer. Between that and their classic fits with a straighter line from waist to hip, the perfect denim does exist. Shop Abercrombie denim in the app, online, and in store.
Okay, so as mentioned, and as probably everybody listening to this knows, tragically on April 8th, 1994, Kurt Cobain died from, like I said, trigger warning suicide from an apparent gunshot wound to the head. I know there are lots of controversies and lots of conspiracy theories. I don't really want to get into those just because, I don't know, sometimes it pisses me off, to be quite frank, and sometimes they can feel disrespectful to me. But I know when this happened, it was like, for some people in my generation, like a death of the generation in a way. It was like one of those impacts, like I know for like the 60s, the Rolling Stones concert where the Hells Angels were there, and they were trying to like do crowd control, and they ended up, like, some people ended up dying. And that some people said that, and also, of course, the Manson murders were like the death of the 60s. I think for some people in my generation, this and then River Phoenix as well were like the death of like some of the generation in a way, or at least of the hope. So, Ashleigh, I'm really curious to hear how your reaction was. Like when you first started listening to the music, and then when you really got into it, did you already know a little bit of the history of Kurt Cobain and his struggles with heroin use and everything like that?
Yeah, I did. And it's a bit of a weird one because this is music I got into when I was, I don't know, like early teens or even just before then. But it's something that had by that time so thoroughly permeated pop culture. The first time I probably heard about Kurt Cobain's death would have been on something like Family Guy, with them making a joke about it. And that was, I would have been, I don't know, late 2000s or something. I was born in 1997. So that was 2 years after Kurt Cobain died. 2 years, 3 years. So, when I actually sort of started to know the world, you get to that age, it was something that had already well been an established thing of Kurt Cobain's death, and that was the end of the Nirvana story. And by then, Dave Grohl had already moved on to Foo Fighters. Other people had gone on to do other things. So it was already set in stone in that way. The effect, I guess, was the rest of the legacy, as it were. You find out about that, and then you learn everything that's on a post-it note about Kurt Cobain. Well, what do you know about him? Well, he was in this band called Nirvana. He had a very troubled life. He was this figure who lived by this philosophy that it was better to burn out than fade away, which was what he wrote in his suicide note, and then he died. And that was kind of it. And then you have to really, again, start to read more, see more, listen to more, and then you get a better, bigger picture, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I'm just curious, because you already knew when you were listening to it, so like for like me and my generation, it wasn't like this, of course, but do you think knowing while you were listening that he had already died and how he died, do you think that impacted at all like the way you can like consumed the music? Like, anything like that?
I don't think so. And that's part of hindsight. And this is kind of what I've got as on my notes about, we'll come to eventually talking about the legacy of the band. Yeah. Hindsight's really interesting to see Nirvana in. I wasn't there when it was coming up. I am here now with it having always existed. And so listening to it back, it's the sort of thing where you might tell yourself, well, he sounds so angry. He sounds so melancholy. He has all these troubles he's clearly trying to express. And then sort of famously people, quote unquote, didn't get it, which was also one of the things that's sort of become in pop culture, the idea that a big part of his struggles were that people just didn't understand the music. It's as the line on In Bloom, they like to sing along, but they don't know what it means. And so you have all of that context already as like established fact. So I can't really tell you whether it would have been different if I'd have heard it before knowing all of that and there had been an evolution. But from this aftermath position, it's really easy to say like, oh, it's so clear, it's so obvious that that's how this journey ends. But that's from this position where you know it. So yeah. I don't know. I don't think it changed my experience listening to it, but I also can't tell you that it wouldn't have done.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. So Ryan?
So I remember probably finding out like everyone else did, Kurt Loder on MTV News. We've got like an MTV News like emergency break or whatever. And, obviously it was tough on me, and we didn't have like social media and like the internet was definitely not what it is now. So I didn't have a lot of like inside information on Kurt Cobain. Like I'm sure he did drugs, but I didn't know, like, I think he had gone into a coma like a couple months before from an overdose or something similar. So I didn't know exactly about how like deep his drug troubles ran. So it was a very shocking thing that he had passed away. And, I had just gotten into their music. The Unplugged show was just about 6 months before that. So it really felt like, someone ripped the rug from under me because I had just gotten into them and now he's gone. And so it was very difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around it. Just kind of felt like there was a cloud over everyone for a really long time. And, I think I had just moved, from the Midwest to San Diego. So I was already kind of like dealing with transition, and then having to deal with now my favorite musician has just left us. I think it definitely had a huge impact on me, and kind of, I don't know. It was a very dark time, and I remember having friends that were also really like, we didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I think it's up there as far as like with music deaths and deaths of musicians, like up there like with, whatever your thoughts are on him, but with John Lennon and, that, where it's somebody who had such a profound impact on a generation and generations after too, that it is one of those that has such a lasting impact. And I think changes the course of like that whole summer afterwards, I think was very hard for people that I knew. And I know, because he had like escaped, a facility, a rehab, but a place that he was supposed to be a treatment facility. And he had, I hate using the word escaped, but he had escaped, essentially gotten out of there and ran away from there. And then this happened a couple days after that. And I don't know, it's like a little bit what you were talking about, Ashleigh, with kind of the hindsight, I think, too, of people who consumed the music. But I think there was also this thing that happened, and I don't know if you remember this too, Ryan, where some people were very angry at everybody else surrounding Kurt Cobain, and also were like, see, we knew what this music was. We knew the pain that was there, but nobody was really listening. And I don't know if you remember that, Ryan. That's just kind of what's sticking out in my head. And I could be just thinking also of like, documentaries that were around at that time and news reports. But I think there was this sense too, because I had so many friends, and myself included, who have struggled with depression and suicidal ideation and feeling suicidal. And it was this very triggering event in a lot of respects of like, if even he can't survive this, how do I survive this world? If someone that looks like they know how to channel that hurt in a productive way or channel it through art, how then, if they can do that and they can't survive, how do I survive? And I think that's what made it darker. I think when someone dies like this, or when someone's murdered, like with John Lennon and others that we have lost that way, I think when that happens, there's this darker aspect to it where people feel really helpless. I think that's kind of the same reaction that happened with River Phoenix when River Phoenix died. I kind of compare the two because I think they're very similar in the impact they had, like almost identical. Like they're kind of like two halves of a whole in a weird way in my brain, because they almost have the same kind of persona, if that makes sense. Like, you know, River Phoenix was very much anti-capitalism and anti-fame, and that's what I think, you know, probably ultimately led to his death. Was the fame part, I think, was part of what led to River Phoenix's death. And then with Kurt Cobain, I always got the feeling he didn't want to be famous, and that wasn't what he was seeking. And fame is, you know, a really dangerous thing for some people. And so I think of them as kind of the same, of like they were these two fragile, very sensitive beings who wound up not being able to handle some aspects of life. But it was really tragic. And it was the same kind of thing, Ryan, where it was that breaking news. You know, there have been a few of those that Kurt Loder, you know, delivered. The River Phoenix, Kurt Cobain, and then also later on, I think he was still the one that did it, but Heath Ledger. And so those are the ones that really stick out to me with hearing that message of, you know, that breaking news. And when you were growing up with that, every time you heard that breaking news, you just were like on the edge of your seat, like, oh no, what are we going to hear? What horrible news are we going to hear? And I think that's because we were delivered news like this. And it was one of those where if you were already in that dark place as a teenager or a preteen, you're listening to this music, it can be a dangerous time, I think, for people and triggering. We will put a link in the show notes to the suicide hotline. We'll also put a link to the Trevor Project's hotline, since, you know, in the United States, they've decided to be so awful about things, of course. So we'll put links for everybody, so everybody has an outlet if needed.
No, I was just going to say, don't worry, we're getting on that train too in the United Kingdom as well. Things are not phenomenal over.
I'm sorry. I know. I think the last time you were on, Ashleigh, we were talking about that in the pop culture episode, I believe. Yeah.
There was of Sean Connery. The situation is not improved.
Oh, it's so scary right now.
I just wanted to add, I think I was reading something recently, and they were arguing that it's not that Kurt Cobain didn't want to be famous, because obviously they signed a major label record deal and they made music videos and stuff like everybody else. But Nirvana reached a level of fame that, you know, I don't think anyone could have expected. You know, They were literally the biggest band in the world. And it's kind of like the Beatles, where like the level of attention that they got was just so overwhelming. You know, a lot of people blame the press for driving Kurt Cobain to suicide because they became so obsessed with his personal life. And I think that's true. Like, I don't think Kurt Cobain knew he could become that famous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think he was like, oh yeah, you know, we have great music and we're going to be a popular band. But I don't think he ever no one that, unless you're crazy, would be like, I'm going to be the most famous person on the planet.
Yeah, and to sort of jump on that as well, it's not, it's being famous, and then it's also the thing of people then treating you kind of like you are this icon, you are this messiah of this generation.
Right.
And sort of desperately claiming, no, I'm not the messiah. These are my thoughts. These are my musings. Feel free to enjoy them. But it's, you know, it's being famous, and then it's being treated like, you know, a living god, as some rock stars do get to that level of escalation. And some people do handle it. Some people very much don't handle it. And those who don't handle it in different ways. Some people just go nuts with megalomania. Other people, unfortunately, just are not able to bear what comes of that when people start hanging on your every word in a way that perhaps that's not what you wanted, or you didn't think you wanted it.
Yeah. Those are both great points about that, because there are different levels of fame, and definitely that level of fame is another stratosphere. Like, no human being, would ever be prepared for that, I don't think. It's almost like being a cult leader without wanting to be a cult leader or starting a cult. It's almost like that. It's like, we have assigned you as our cult leader, even though you don't want to be a cult leader and you don't want to do that. And you're not trying to, like you said, you're not being a messiah. You're not trying to be like the second coming. You're not doing any of that, but you've been assigned that role. Like I said, like, he was like the face of a generation, and that is a hard thing to do. And to be able to survive that takes a lot. And I mean, to not be able to go anywhere or live your life, or to be treated like you're not a human, is the other aspect of it. People forget there's a human being behind all of that. Okay, well, we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about the lasting impact of Nirvana. So we'll be right back.
When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Checking off the boxes on your to-do list is a great feeling. And when it comes to checking off coverage, a State Farm agent can help you choose an option that's right for you. Whether you prefer talking in person, on the phone, or using the award-winning app, it's nice knowing you have help finding coverage that best fits your needs. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Okay, Ashleigh, so what is Nirvana's lasting impact on music? Which I know is hard to sum up, but...
Well, it gives a nice little recapitulation, because I come back in here with the way I came in at the beginning, which is it's everything that came after it. Now, obviously, Nirvana, they got 3 albums, they got a bunch of B-sides and a bunch of deep cuts, all of the unplugged stuff, but it's not a huge discography when you compare it, spans, that lasted much longer. The actual lifespan of Nirvana as a band, if you look at the very earliest iterations of it, you'd call it 1987, really you'd call it 1989 through 1994. That's not a super long run. The impact is in everything that came after it. You touched on this earlier, the death of, whatever you want to call it, stadium rock, hair metal, glam metal, the death of that whole genre that had been completely dominant with this new mode. But also, I want to highlight the things that Cobain particularly sponsored. Things like Riot Girl as a whole genre. Now, this is not to take anything away from bands like Bikini Kill, or any of the other major Riot Girl bands that came up, but Cobain was a figure who got that platform and then was like, come tour with us, let's put you up on stage, let's give you this spotlight and this opportunity to really come into your own. And then there's a whole subgenre of feminist punk that is descended from this genre that Nirvana helped to bring a spotlight on. Again, not to take away from them, but just it was a good use of their platform to do that, which then gives it that extra longevity, beyond just the music and then the music that sounds like that music. It's what are all of these different movements that came off the back of it. And then as a little corollary, all of everything that Dave Grohl has done since. If you're a fan of Foo Fighters, well, Nirvana made Dave Grohl into an icon, and a big part of why he started Foo Fighters was the aftermath of the end of Nirvana and thinking, well, what am I going to do on myself now? I have to do something. I can't do nothing. I have to channel all these feelings into something new and productive. And then that came out of it.
And Ryan?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the impact of Nirvana, because I feel like we don't feel it as much musically. Like, it's not like, oh, there's all these bands that I listen to that sound kind of like Nirvana. They kind of have that mystique like the Beatles, where you don't want to sound too much like them, or people are just going to hate you for ripping off of them.
Yeah.
But, I agree with Ashleigh that I think it's a lot of what Kurt endorsed. The bands that he would bring on tour with him, the fact that they still would do these one-off singles on different indie labels with bands that they liked. They did a a split with the Jesus Lizard, which is kind of grunge, but kind of more noisy. Kurt did some sort of music thing with William S. Burroughs at one point. And, he was very particular with bands they would tour with. The Nirvana Live and Loud concert on MTV, he was very adamant that the Breeders opened for them because he was a huge fan of Kim Deal and, the Pixies' influence on Nirvana. Like, he was very big on that stuff and bringing bands on tour that he wanted people to listen to. And so I think that, like, indie rock's rise, I think, came partly from the fact that, Kurt Cobain was still interested in those bands. Even though he was a huge rock star, he still wanted to know, like, the independent circuit. Like, he wanted to be in the know with what was coming up and who was exciting to listen to. He didn't say, like, I'm the biggest rock star in the world and I'm just going to tour the other big rock bands. He was a huge proponent of, like, Sonic Youth. And, I feel like the fact that indie got popular at the end of the 90s and into the, 2004, the early 2000s with, like, Garden State and all that stuff, I think you can trace that back to Kurt Cobain, like, co-signing off on a lot of new music for people.
I think that's quite an interesting point, if I may just say. It reminds me of an analogy that I heard about the band M and the song Pop Music, one of the sort of, like, really early new wave songs in the late 70s. And the analogy was that it looked a lot like an early car, like a steam carriage, in that if you're there at the time in the late 1800s and you look at this thing clunking down the road, you think, I don't really know what that is. It's kind of cool. It's definitely going to be something. And then you look with the hindsight, you go, well, obviously that's the first car. All of these things that came after it. There's not many things, as you say, there's not many bands that try and sound like Nirvana. You can't really try and sound like Nirvana. For many, many reasons, it was a very particular sound. You've got the Seattle sound, of course, but that was kind of encapsulated. Nobody's really doing grunge anymore these days. But it has such a legacy, such that at the time when you're looking at it, it's kind of hard to see the whole bigger picture that will eventually come after it. And it's got that weird, like, historical, not artifact really. It's kind of, almost like an artifact, almost fossilized in amber. This one sound at this one time that was so big and so influential, but in the downstream, not in its specifics, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you both for bringing up also the fact that Kurt Cobain was very adamant about helping others and giving a voice to a light spotlight to others, especially if they were female artists. I think that also is really important. And someday we're going to talk about the Pixies on this podcast, who I finally saw in concert last year. But yeah, I think that's a very good point, because I think that speaks to your legacy in a different way, where you're not being selfish, if that makes sense. Like, you're not, like, just taking all the fame or all the accolades or all the attention just for yourself. You're like, how can I use this attention to help others that might not get that? And that's huge. That's big. And I think the other lasting legacy is the fact that, because, at that time, before Nirvana, really, there was, most of the popular music was very shallow, very surface, and not a lot of depth to it. There was definitely music that was happening that did have a lot of depth, but a lot of that was really more underground or wasn't talked about as much, wasn't played on MTV all the time. Or if it was really like early morning hours kind of thing or something. So I think because of Nirvana's success, you're able to have more music and more bands afterwards and more musicians, solo artists, everything that were able to feel like, okay, I don't have to fit into this pop market. I don't have to fit into this hairband market. I can talk about what I really want to talk about. I can push boundaries. I can really say what I want to say. And I think that is a bigger lasting legacy sometimes than just what influence you might have on the sound of music, but an impact to be able to give people courage to also do what they want to do with their music or do what they want to do with their artistry. And I think that can be felt with Nirvana. And I think because Nirvana was at a time, of course, when visual media was such a big part of music, with videos and all of that, I think the videos and the way those videos were used, you know, you had other bands that were using videos, like, of course, 9 Inch Nails and other bands that were using that medium to also highlight the darkness or the depth or like some of the messaging they were trying to get across, or like talking about like, you know, against capitalism or against the stuff we're being shoved down our throat, that's being shoved down our throats as a younger generation, or that kind of stuff. And so even though, you know, the ultimate fame might have been damaging in a way to them personally, I think they were able to find a way to use it to get their messaging across to more people through that visual medium on top of just the auditory medium. And I know, Ryan, you had said a while back that you weren't able to see Nirvana in concert. I never saw Nirvana in concert either. But I know you said you were almost able to, right?
No, I mean, I don't think so, because I was like 11. I was 11 at the time, and my parents were not going to take me to a rock show.
They're like, no.
Yeah, I think it's my biggest regret that I was never able to see Nirvana, but it's not because I had a chance to. It's just, I feel like, you know, it's like an experience that you can't recreate.
Yeah, there are some of those that I would just have loved to have seen. And that's why I always feel so grateful when I get to see bands, especially when someone dies. Like I'm so grateful I got to see the Cramps in concert, you know, before Lex Interior died and everything. So it's like those kind of experiences where you get to see them and it's a one-of-a-kind kind of live experience. Because some bands, frankly, aren't necessarily that impactful live or that memorable, you know, but then there are others that, you know, are a whole entire experience. So
yeah, because I've heard Dave Grohl drum, and like at a show where like someone else is drumming, and then like Dave wants to like drum for a couple songs, and like, you know, he's playing with other great drummers at these shows I've been to, and just the sheer volume of Dave Grohl drumming versus Bob Mould's drummer or even Taylor drumming, it's like so much louder. I think I interviewed Mike Watt once, and he was like, nobody plays drums as loud as Dave Grohl does. And that is not an understatement. And to have that paired with, you know, Kurt Cobain's voice, like I can only imagine how powerful that would be live.
Yeah. Yeah. And drummers don't get as much attention as I think sometimes they deserve anyway. So to have a drummer stand out like that, yeah. Well, since, you know, we're making good time, I'll just give both of you a quick moment. If there's anything else either one of you want to add quickly about Nirvana, and then we'll do 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock.
I guess I just think it's such an interesting band in general because it did exist for such a short time and had so much shadow, I guess. A lot of the other bands that I like, one of my favorite bands is Led Zeppelin. And to compare a very loud drummer, John Bonham, I think the only person who really matches John Bonham's loudness is Dave Grohl when he's at the kit. You know, when you compare the huge discography they had, and then of course how well known they are to Nirvana was very well known. But I do wonder if Kurt would have necessarily liked the way that they're remembered. I think I don't know if either of you have played the video game Disco Elysium, but there's a line in it where somebody basically says every critique of capitalism is eventually subsumed into capitalism. And then you see the Nirvana logo on every mug and fridge magnet and t-shirt. And that's part of the way it goes sometimes. But one wonders if that would have been the legacy that Kurt would have chosen, for better or for worse.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Yeah. Ryan, was there anything else you wanted to add?
I just wanted to talk more about MTV's Unplugged in New York because it's a weird concert. It's a weird album. Like the way that people were doing Unplugged at this point was like, we're just going to play the hits in an acoustic way. And Nirvana was like, we're not going to play Smells Like Teen Spirit or In Bloom or Lithia. Like we'll play Come As You Are, but we're going to play almost none of the singles. We're going to do covers by people you've never heard of, like the Vaselines. We're going to have the Meat Puppets show up and play some songs of theirs with us. Like, this is, going to be the most watched MTV program of all time. Like, hey, Meat Puppets, you want to come play a couple of your songs from that album from like 1985? Let's do it. And I think recently some of the like production notes have come up to light of like MTV being like, well, how about we have Tori Amos show up in the middle of the show and she can play Smells Like Teen Spirit on the piano. And Kurt Cobain being like, no, this is how we're going to do it. And, and it's a very like unique performance. And I think people don't think about it enough as like comparing it to other Unplugs. Like, what were they doing? Like, he's playing the accordion now. Oh, and obviously the funny story about at one point during rehearsals, Kurt Cobain just walking up to Dave Grohl and snatching his drumsticks out of his hand and giving him rods because he couldn't play soft enough with regular drumsticks.
Well, you reminded me, Ryan, actually, of a story of one of the weirdest Nirvana sets that they ever did, which is Buenos Aires in 1992, which there is footage of. They had brought a band on to open for them called Calamity Jane, which was a Riot Girl band. And the audience in Buenos Aires, predominantly men, were booing them, were jeering them, were throwing stuff at them, according to Kurt's account of the story. And it basically just ruined the opening set. And so Nirvana was sort of deciding what to do. And so Kurt said, okay, let's do it this way. And he put on a dress and they walk out on stage and they just flub the whole show. Kurt is singing in this weird monotone. They mix up the set list randomly. They keep doing the opening riff to Smells Like Teen Spirit and then segueing into a really obscure B-side that they then intentionally play badly. And they could see the crowd getting angrier and angrier, but they stuck to it and they rounded out the show like that. Which, it was a bit controversial at the time because people were like, oh, well, they paid to see your show. And the response from Nirvana was basically like, yeah, but they didn't respect our opening act. We brought them on, to showcase their music to you and you treat them like that. Well, we're going to treat you like this. And it's such an interesting encapsulation of the way that they were to just be so intentionally, adversarial like that, but for that good reason, to stand up for the people that they were playing with.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've heard about that. That speaks a lot to a person's character and that they are true artists, frankly, and not selfish artists. That's really amazing. And that crowd got what they deserved then because seriously, that's awesome. I love that story. That's great. And for some reason, it also reminded me of, I don't know if you've seen, it's not the same at all, but if both of you have seen that recent video from a Nine Inch Nails concert where there was Santa was crowd surfing through the crowd and they were doing Head Like a Hole and Trent Reznor lost it and just started laughing and was like, it's really hard to sing dark lyrics like this when Santa is crowd surfing. I just thought that was really funny. One of those moments, So, yeah. Okay, so like I mentioned at the top, Carla did record something with some of her thoughts about Nirvana. So before we close out, before we finish this episode, I just wanted to give Carla a chance to share her thoughts. So we'll be right back.
First of all, Erin, thank you for letting me jump in belatedly and just kind of sneaking in my thoughts. So to start, the first song that got my attention from Nirvana was About a Girl. And okay, hear me out. I know it's going to sound weird, but just follow the thought. About a Girl has a similar structure to the music of the Beatles, but in a crunchier way that, well, at least I find satisfying. And also the Beatles are overrated and Nirvana isn't. I invite you to fight me, but don't, because I would get very sad. If you strip it of the grunge aspects, it's very Beatles-esque, and the same can be said for many of Nirvana's songs. Like, really think about it. Go back, listen to them, think of them without everything that makes it Nirvana. No, without the things that make it closer to modern. The structure of the songs sounds a lot like the Beatles. You can absolutely hear the Beatles playing it if you just think about it. Just be in my mind for a second. Just be there. As for my 3 favorite songs, they're Heart-Shaped Box, which to me is a culmination of the progression and refinement of their sound. Smells Like Teen Spirit, in part because my little guy was obsessed with it for a while, a few years ago, and Lithium. Kurt Cobain's death had a huge impact on music and on the generation of teens who grew up in the 90s. It was, I think, one of the most visible suicides of our youngish era. And it was very difficult to be in like the teen, adolescent age and falling in love with their music and then having him die in that way. There was a huge impact, I think, that it had. But then, of course, in the music, because for one thing, Nirvana being pretty much the flag bearer of grunge music, we don't know what Nirvana would be doing 10, 15 years after that batch of albums came out. We certainly wouldn't have had the Foo Fighters, I don't think. So, and the Foo Fighters themselves were very influential. So I don't know what the landscape would look like now. I don't know what the sound would look like. I do think that bands like Soundgarden also helped shape that sound. So I don't know. It would definitely still be different if Nirvana had been around for longer. And that's it. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Well, thank you both. And I know it's so hard with the music ones sometimes, but we are going to play 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock. Now, did both of you play?
Yep.
Awesome. Yay. So, Ashleigh, how did you connect Finn Whitrock to Nirvana?
So, Dave Grohl, the drummer from Nirvana, was in a movie that he fronted called Studio 666 with Leslie Grossman. Leslie Grossman was in American Horror Story double feature with Finn Whitrock. And I think, what do you call that? 2 moves, 3 moves, however you call it.
Yeah, just like a couple. Yeah, that was really quick. That was awesome. Yay!
That took me a long time to find all of that. I kept giving Google's stupid AI feature kept throwing me stuff that was not correct.
Oh, that was your mistake.
About connection. It was. I wasn't trying to use it. It just comes up. I fucking hate AI and the way it's infecting every part of my life nowadays. I was like, no, I need to actually find the real things. But it's fine.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yay. So, Ryan?
So I'm also going to use Dave Grohl because Dave Grohl's friends with everybody.
Yes.
But Dave Grohl plays the devil in Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny because he is best friends with Jack Black. Jack Black is in Anchorman with Steve Carell. And Steve Carell is in The Big Short with Finn Whitrock.
Yay! And then that's also the opportunity to say, who else is in The Big Short? Our unofficial mascot, Mr. Christian fucking Bale. And coming up, of course, in a couple months, it's Christian Bale month in January. So we will have Carla, of course, returning with her amazing spot-on Christian Bale impression. Ashleigh, I don't know if you recall, during our marathon streaming event, you said you were going to do some private tutoring
well,
for Carla.
I was, but I've been able to spare Carla this because I looked it up after. I said I was going to teach her Welsh, a language I don't speak, but some of my relatives do. Because Christian Bale is Welsh. But I then looked it up afterwards, and Christian Bale, despite being Welsh, does not consider himself Welsh at all. He says, I lived none of my life there. I don't speak the language. I'm English. I'm not Welsh. So it's actually fine for me to not go through with learning Welsh in order to teach Carla Welsh. I think we're good on that one.
Yes, and I'm sure, I don't know if Nicole, Ryan's co-host from Soundtrack Your Life, because I know Nicole loves Christian Bale. So hopefully we can get Nicole on that month. And I don't know if Ashleigh would want to be on any of those. Those, of course, we also always do videos so you can see, quote unquote, Christian. Yeah, and then, of course, Christian Bale trivia. It's a whole thing in January. So whenever anybody uses Big Short, I always say that. Of course, when we do Christian Bale month, I don't let anybody use the Big Short for that because, I mean, hello. It's kind of cheating. Okay, so I kind of cheated. I want to be honest. I did use the Oracle of Bacon because I was so busy and I just kind of went, oh my gosh, I got to do this. And I plugged in Kurt Cobain. So hopefully this is all completely accurate. But Kurt Cobain was in RuPaul's Christmas Ball, or maybe just the music was featured. Little Richard was there too, Little Richard was in Mystery, Alaska with Russell Crowe, who was in Winter's Tale with Finn Whitrock. And also I like this one because who else was in Winter's Tale? My future hubby, Colin Farrell. That's right. So yes, we will be talking about Colin Farrell in November as part of my birthday month. But thank you both for playing. I really appreciate it. I always love it when my panelists play along. So thank you both so much. we're going to go ahead and close out, and both of my lovely panelists can tell you where they can be found. So, Ashleigh Stiles from ZARD Radio, tell everybody where they can listen to you.
Well, it's right on the button there. Ashleigh Stiles live on ZARD Radio. It's an online station, so you can just find it at wizardradio.com. I'm live on Sundays, 9 p.m. UK time, talking about international news and stuff. Very much not pop culture, but this is something that I love to do because I love talking about pop culture and I don't get a chance to on my main stuff. I'm also on Twitter at AshStiles97. I almost never post, but I am on there. So, stay posted for more stuff.
Awesome. And sometimes you can hear Ashleigh on Doing the Thing, which I've been on there before with Ashleigh, which is part of ZARD as well. So, yeah, that's a podcast too. So, Ryan, co-host of Soundtrack Your Life, tell everybody where that amazing podcast can be found.
You can listen to us wherever you listen to your podcast. We should be on every possible platform. You can find us online at soundtrackyourlife.net on Blue Sky and SoundtrackCast on Instagram and Twitter. And then we have a writing site at blog.soundtrackyourlife.net, where probably by the time this episode is out, you'll be able to read Nicole's interview with Jonathan Richman.
Awesome. Yes. So thank you both so much. And if you want to follow a cute dog who we're coming up to Horror Month soon, you can, and she loves horror movies and she loves true crime and Abbott Elementary. And this is not a joke. She sits there and watches intently. And that's Fergie the dog. You can follow her on TikTok at Schroeder and Fergs. That's SCHROEDERANDFERGS. It's long, but it's worth it. To find our back catalog, links to all our social media, links to our Patreon, all of that, go to our website. It's afandomthingpod.com. And if you want to become a Patreon supporter for as little as $3 a month, you get bonus content. You get ad-free episodes. You get episodes a day early. And occasionally, you can win prizes, like for our upcoming horror trivia event, which Ashleigh is one of our contestants. You do not have to know anything about trivia or horror movies to play. You just choose your player and you get their points. So if you think Ashleigh knows everything there is to know about that category for that night, you would choose Ashleigh and you would get Ashleigh's points. So that's how you can rack up. We're going to have first, second, and third place. We've got some great prizes that people are donating. Very excited about it. We'll also, of course, have our It's a Horror Thing merch as well to give out during that. And it's just a fun event. So stay tuned for more info on that. It's on our YouTube channel that will broadcast that. Ryan is not going to be a part because Ryan doesn't do horror, but
I'm disqualified because I am a scaredy cat.
He's too scared to do that. But maybe he'll be back for another trivia event that we have later on. So click the link in our show notes or go to it'safandomthingpod.com and click the Support Us tab there. And next week, we are going to continue our look at grunge music with a discussion about Soundgarden. And for that one, we have Sarah. And then returning from Talking Like a Teen podcast, Adrian. So I'm looking forward to that one. So until next time, remember, it's a fandom thing. Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, and Free Palestine.